Hello and thank you for joining me this Sunday afternoon. I hope you're all well. The topic that I've picked for this week is quite an interesting one, but it has a lot of people on the fence. There are a lot of cases of children remembering past lives. How can a small child remember every little detail of an event before they were even born? Is this a result of an overactive imagination, or is it something more? So join me as I delve into past lives. When William Barnes was 4 years old, he drew a ship with 4 smokestacks. He showed the drawing to his parents and told them, "This is my ship, but she died." Soon he started insisting that his family call him Tommy instead of William, and he wouldn't stop talking about 2 brothers and other family members. None of what he was saying made any sense to his parents, and the situation escalated when William started having non-stop nightmares about a huge ship, freezing water, and steel slabs falling on top of him. The nightmares continued, and it was only at the age of 25 that William sought help. He underwent hypnosis, and during the session he could hear himself arguing about the ship's design. As soon as he awoke from the hypnotic trance, he told the counsellor, "My name is Tommy Andrews." Soon the fragmented pieces of William's nightmares started forming a complete picture. He became increasingly convinced that he was the reincarnation of Titanic designer Thomas Andrews. William Barnes was born on the date the Titanic sank, and during hypnotic age regression sessions later in his life, he spoke with a heavy Irish accent while detailing the sinking of the ship and how he died on the deck. William now has his own website on which he details his experiences and presents proof of his claim to reincarnation fame. A 3-year-old Thai boy named Dalawong became the focus of many studies and articles after he claimed to have had 2 past lives, one in which he was a deer killed by a hunter, and then another one as a cobra when he was reincarnated after his death. While he was a snake, Dalawong found himself in a life-or-death fight with 2 dogs. The dog's owner intervened and killed the snake, aka Dalawong, but not before the slithery reptile bit him on the shoulder. The dog owner, Mr. Hugh, took the dead snake home, cooked and ate it, and shared some of the meat with a friend. That friend would become Dalawong's father. Fast forward to 3 years after Dalawong's birth, the young boy recognised Mr. Hugh at a party, taking place next door to his own house. He became instantly angry and tried to find a weapon to attack the man. Dalawong's mother was stunned at her child's anger and forced him to tell her what was happening. He related the snake tale to her, and when she confronted Mr. Hugh, he confirmed that he had indeed killed a snake a few years prior, and that he had a mark from where the snake had bitten him on the shoulder. Before this incident, Hugh Dalawong and his family had never met Mr. Hugh. In 2014, the parents of 4-year-old Andrew Lucas began suspecting that their beloved boy may be possessed or have some kind of ghost inside of him. This happened after Andrew started crying almost non-stop and asking why his parents let him die in a fire. When his mother, Michelle, asked him what fire he was talking about, Andrew started telling her little details of what was his past life as a US Marine. Eventually, Michelle used these details to uncover the story of US Marine Sergeant Val Lewis, who died in a bomb attack in Lebanon in 1983. Because the details of what happened to Lewis and the story Andrew told her were so similar, Michelle decided to take the issue to reality TV show Ghost Inside My Child. During the show, Andrew was given several photographs of military men to look at, and he immediately zoomed in on an image of Lewis. Afterward, Michelle took her son to Lewis's gravesite in Georgia, where Andrew laid flowers in front of it. He also ran to another grave and pointed to the name on it, saying, "That's my friend." It turned out that the grave also belonged to a Marine. A very unnerving story caused an uproar in 2014 when it was reported that a 3-year-old Syrian boy had pointed out where his past life's body had been buried after he was murdered. He also pointed out the murder weapon. The boy, who belongs to the Druze ethnic group, has a long red birthmark on his forehead, which according to Druze beliefs is related to how a person died in a previous life. This belief was seemingly substantiated by the boy, who told his parents that he'd been killed by an axe to the head in his previous life, hence the birthmark. The elders of the village the boy stayed in took him to the home he lived in during his past life, getting the location from the details the boy gave. Eventually, standing in front of the house, the boy remembered the house, the village, and his old name. The man whose house it was had gone missing 4 years earlier, according to locals. When the elders quizzed the boy about this turn of events, he told them the full name of the person who had killed him when he was the man who lived in the house. He then led the elders to the spot where the body was buried, and sure enough, they uncovered a skeleton with a head wound that correlated to the boy's birthmark, as well as an axe. When confronted by the elders and locals, the killer confessed to the crime soon after. When James Arthur Flowerdew was 12 years old, he began having strange dreams. These dreams were blurry and vague when they first started, but over time they became clear pictures. As he continued to dream, he saw a stone city carved into a cliff and various temples inside the city. He also saw a rock shaped like a volcano situated on the fringes of the stone city. Arthur did not know what to make of these dreams and tried to ignore them. On one particular day, Arthur visited the beach with his family. As he was playing around with pebbles and bent down to pick them up, a vision slammed into his head. It was the city of his dreams. So intense was the vision that he could smell dry desert air. Dropping the pebbles made the image dissipate, leaving Arthur at a loss for words. He revisited the beach a short time later to see if the vision would happen again, and as soon as he picked up the pebbles, it did. He saw more details the second time, such as a stone passage and military barracks. For the first time, Arthur started thinking that he may have been a soldier in this dream city and had been killed there by a spear. Arthur never had any explanation for his experiences. Many years later, when he was an old man, Arthur watched a documentary about the ancient city of Petra in Jordan. He instantly realised that this was his city of dreams, and he became convinced that he had lived there in a past life. He contacted the BBC, who arranged an interview between Arthur and an archaeologist. The archaeologist was flabbergasted when he discovered how much knowledge Arthur had of the ancient city without ever having been there in his current life. Eventually, the Jordanian government invited Arthur to visit Petra. Arthur found his way around the city without the help of a guide or a map and pointed out sites that hadn't even been excavated yet. He talked about a military barracks where he worked as a check-in system for guards and even provided facts about the area that experts were not aware of. Barbara O'Carlan was born 9 years after Anne Frank died. From a young age, she insisted that Barbara wasn't her real name and that her family should call her Anne instead. She also told her parents that she knew they weren't her real mum and dad. At that point, Barbara's family wasn't up to date with the Anne Frank story and thought that Barbara was losing her mind. They carted her off to a psychiatrist, thinking that she was somehow lost in a fantasy. By age 12, Barbara wrote a book of poetry that would become one of the most popular books in her native Sweden. She went on to write 9 more volumes. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't who everyone thought she was. But she stopped talking about it after she realised who Anne Frank was and that people likely thought she was insane. This was despite the trip to Amsterdam with her parents at age 10, during which they visited the house of Anne Frank. Barbara knew exactly how to get to the house and that the steps outside it had been changed. Her parents were stunned. Once Barbara entered Anne's room, she felt an overwhelming fear but refused to leave. She knew that there had once been pictures on the wall placed there by Anne, and when she told her mother this, the older woman finally understood what her daughter had been trying to tell them for years. She was Anne Frank in a past life. Barbara met Anne's cousin, Buddy Elias, years later, and he told reporters he believed that she was the reincarnation of Anne. Dorothy Eady, also known as Seti, was born in the Blackheath area of London on January 6, 1904. When she was 3 years old, she fell down the stairs at home. The family doctor determined her to be dead, but an hour later she was fine. After that, she began to have dreams of living in a large building, adorned with columns. She said frequently that she wanted to go home. And when she was 4, during a trip to the British Museum, she declared that home was Egypt. She moved to Egypt in 1933 to be with her husband, who was Egyptian, and although the marriage ended 2 years later, she stayed put. She became a folklorist, a keeper of the Abydos Temple of Seti I, and a draftswoman for the Department of Egyptian Antiquities, and she believed that she had, in a past life, been a young woman named Bentrashite, an orphan who'd been adopted by the Temple of Kom el Sultan near Abydos. "I can't remember any ordinary life, so I think I must have been stuck in the temple," she told the New York Times in 1979. "I have a vague memory of the processions. I can remember an awful old killjoy of a high priest." And in 1987, several years after she died in 1981, it emerged that she also believed that in her past life she'd been a lover of King Seti, who became pregnant. She said Bentrashite had died in a suicide, rather than reveal that the king had fathered a child with her. In European cases of the reincarnation type, Ian Stevenson details the case of Laurie Raynaud, who was born in Ormont, France in 1868. She rejected the Catholic teachings she was raised with, insisting that hell, heaven and purgatory didn't exist. Rather, she believed the idea that each time people die, they return to Earth in different bodies. Raynaud moved to Paris at the age of 17, studied medicine and became a healer. She married in 1904. During this time she also learned what was called magnetism, a type of hypnosis, and it was whilst working with Gaston Derville, who ran a clinic in Paris, that she finally began speaking of what she believed were memories of a past life. She remembered living somewhere with lots of sun, in a very large 2-storey house with lots of arched windows. There was a park nearby with lots of old trees in it. Additionally, a number of small houses belonging to workers were located near the house. She believed the memories were from when her past personage was about 25 years old, and from roughly 100 years ago. She said she had a chest disease and she was plagued with coughing. Later on in life, Raynaud went to Genoa, Italy, and felt an immediate familiarity with the place, even though she had never been there before. She tracked down a house in the countryside that locals said matched the one she described from her memories, and it was here that she came to believe that in a past life she had been Giovanna Spontini, who had lived in the house Raynaud had located and died in 1809 of chronic illness and catching a severe chill. Born in 1926 in Delhi, India, Shanti Devi was 4 years old when she began telling her parents that her home wasn't in Delhi, it was 90 miles away in Mathura, where she said her husband lived. She recounted memories of having been married and later dying from complications from childbirth. She described what her husband looked like, light-skinned, a wart on his cheek and reading glasses, and where his shop was located, by the Dwarkadish temple. Eventually she revealed her past persona's husband's name, Pandit Kedarnath Chaub. As it turned out, the man existed. He had lost his wife, Lugdi Bai, from complications with the C-section she had undergone when giving birth to their son, Navneet Lal. What's more, Shanti recognised both Pandit and Navneet on sight. Shanti's story was investigated by 3 notable people: and all three were struck by the fact that so many details of her story were verifiable. On May 5, 1957, Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock, aged 11 and 6 respectively, were killed in a car crash in Hexham, Northumberland, in the UK. They had been on the way to church with a friend. Everyone in the car had died instantly. The girls' parents, John and Florence Pollock, were devastated. John kept praying that his daughters would come back. Florence became pregnant in 1958, and here's where it starts to get weird. Although her doctors had not believed she was having twins, on October 4th, 1958, she gave birth to identical twin girls. Florence and John named them Gillian and Jennifer, and immediately noticed some strange similarities between Jennifer and Jacqueline. Jacqueline had had a scar on her forehead. Jennifer also had a mark there. Jacqueline had a birthmark on her leg. So did Jennifer. Gillian did not share any of these marks with her sister. The Pollock family moved from Hexham to Whitley Bay when the twins were just a few months old, but when they were 4, they returned to Hexham. The girls were eerily familiar with Hexham, despite the fact that they wouldn't have been old enough to make memories of it before they'd moved away. For example, they said they remembered playing on the playground of a specific school. They had never attended this school, but their older sisters, about whom they had no knowledge, had. The girls also recognised and correctly named toys that had been Joanna and Jacqueline's, and most frightening of all, became enormously afraid of cars for fear one would crash into them. Pioneering reincarnation researcher Ian Stevenson investigated the case after learning about it through newspaper coverage in 1963. That same year, when the twins were 4 years old, he met the family at their home, interviewed the parents at length, and examined the girls for birthmarks. He met the family again in 1967 and corresponded with them until next visiting them in 1978 when the twins were 20. At that point he had blood tests arranged to determine their zygosity, which showed they were monozygotic identical twins. Florence Pollock died in 1979. Stevenson visited John and his new wife as well as Gillian in 1982 and continued to correspond with John until his death in 1985. Stephen wrote a detailed case report in the second volume of Reincarnation and Biology, a contribution to the etiology of birthmarks and birth defects, and summarised versions in 2 other works. Gillian and Jennifer made several statements and recognitions relating to Joanna and Jacqueline between the ages of 3 and 7. When the twins were about 3, the parents brought out the toys that had belonged to their deceased daughters and which had been boxed and stored in the attic. Gillian claimed the doll that had belonged to Joanna, and Jennifer claimed the one that had belonged to Jacqueline. They both said the dolls had been gifts from Santa Claus, as they had been for Joanna and Jacqueline. When Gillian saw a toy clothes ringer that had also been a Santa Claus present to Joanna, she said, "There is my toy ringer," adding that Santa had brought it. The girls quarrelled over none of the toys. Florence Pollock occasionally overheard Gillian and Jennifer discussing the details of the accident. Once she came across Gillian cradling Jennifer's head, saying, "The blood's coming out of your eyes, that's where the car hit you." John Pollock recalled that when he identified the bodies, Jacqueline's head had been bandaged above the eyes. Gillian once pointed to Jennifer's forehead birthmark and said, "That's the mark Jennifer got when she fell on a bucket." Florence had worn a smock while helping John with the milk delivery business, but put it away when she ceased that work shortly after her daughter's deaths. When the twins were about 4 and a half, John wore the smock to do some painting, and Jennifer asked him, "Why are you wearing Mummy's coat?" She then became annoyed at Gillian for not recognising it, but the older sister had been at school and had not seen her mother wearing the garment. When John asked Jennifer how she knew the smock was Florence's, Jennifer said her mother had worn it while delivering milk. When the girls once complained about the lunch they were having at home, their mother said they could have lunch at school, and they answered, "We've done that before." This was not true of Gillian and Jennifer, but had been true of Joanna and Jacqueline. According to John Pollock, when the twins discussed the accident between themselves, they often spoke in the present tense, almost as if they were reliving it. The twins displayed behaviours that were similar to those of their deceased sisters. Like the older girls, they were very close, and Gillian liked to mother Jennifer, which Jennifer accepted. The twins looked most to their maternal grandmother, who had done most to raise Joanna and Jacqueline, for guidance and love, even though Florence was now entirely available. Also, like their elder sisters, the twins liked to comb people's hair, especially their father's. Gillian was more sociable and generous with other children, and showed the same early interest in costumes and acting that Joanna had. She generally seemed more mature than her twin sister despite their identical age. The twins had phobias related to cars. Their mother noticed that they would be very careful crossing streets, holding her hands, though she knew that that could be related to her own caution. On one occasion, when a car engine started near them in an enclosed alleyway, John Pollock observed the girls cringe in terror and cling to each other, crying, the car, it's coming for us," possibly being reminded of the wall that had prevented their escape in their previous lives. At the time of their deaths, Jacqueline had still been learning to write. Her teacher, concerned that she was still holding the pencil upright in her fist, suggested to the parents that they correct the habit by slapping her hand. When Gillian and Jennifer began learning to write at age 4, Gillian immediately held the pencil properly, while Jennifer held it upright in her fist. She only started holding it properly at age 7, and even as a young adult would still sometimes revert to the fist grip. Joanna was somewhat slender of build, as was Gillian. Likewise, Jennifer's somewhat stocky build matched Jacqueline's. Joanna had a more splay-footed gait than Jacqueline did, and this difference showed up in Gillian and Jennifer also. At birth, a dark brown roundish birthmark was observed on the left side of Jennifer's waist, at the spot where there had been a similar mark on Jacqueline's. Stevenson noted that since the twins were monozygotic and therefore identical genetically, genetics cannot explain Jennifer's birthmarks. As the twins grew older, they forgot their past life memories. During their early years, John Pollock refrained from referring to their statements about what they remembered, nor did he discuss with them his belief in reincarnation, which they learned about only at the age of 13. The twins went on to live normal lives. When Stevenson met them in their 20s, they said they remembered nothing about their past lives. They accepted their parents' belief that they were their elder sisters reincarnated, while showing mild scepticism about reincarnation generally. Then in 1981, Gillian experienced some inner visions, in which she saw herself playing in a sandpit with her brothers. She perfectly described the house, garden, lawns and orchards that matched a house the family had lived in Wickham, when Joanna had been younger than 4. Gillian had never been to Wickham. Stevenson, who studied 42 pairs of twins who remembered past lives, concludes that the Pollock twins' case, together with that of another pair of monozygotic twins who displayed variant appearance and behaviour, Indika and Kakshapa Ishwara, provides some of the strongest existing evidence in favour of reincarnation. A young boy has claimed he was reincarnated and even knows how he died in a past life. In a bizarre series of interviews, 5-year-old Luke Ruhlman insists that he lived a past life as Pam Robinson, an African-American woman killed in a fire at Chicago's Paxton Hotel in 1993. Luke's mum, Erica, said her son began spooking her out at just 2 years old when he started talking about a mystery woman named Pam. Confused, she asked him who Pam was, before the tot replied with a truly spine-chilling answer. She says, "He turned to me and said, well, I used to be, but I died and I went up to heaven. I saw God, and then eventually God pushed me back down, and I was a baby, and you named me Luke." She also insisted that her son told her he travelled by train in Chicago. The Ruhlman family, who live in Cincinnati, Ohio, were left baffled. They'd never taken their son to Chicago, and they didn't know anyone named Pam. Erica did some research and was stunned to discover that Pam Robinson was one of 19 people who died in a hotel fire almost 30 years ago. Luke claims he can remember leaping from the burning building to his death in 1993, before being reincarnated after he met God. Erica insisted her son would often come out with other eerie details that he remembered from his past life. He used to say, "When I was a girl I had black hair," or he would say, "I I used to have earrings like that when I was a girl, she said. Producers of a paranormal investigations TV show, The Ghost Inside My Child, also investigated Luke's remarkable claims. In footage from the show, Luke was shown a page full of pictures of black women in their 30s, one of whom was the late Pamela Robinson. When asked to pick out Pamela, the footage claims, he chose the right picture first time. Following the creepy development, Luke's mum decided to reach out to Pam's family. She said they described her personality and revealed chilling similarities between the pair, such as their love for Stevie Wonder and playing on the keyboard. Despite further efforts to try and speak to them, Pamela's family have declined to comment further. To round off the video, I decided to include a couple of reports from a website called reincarnationstories.org, which I thought were particularly interesting. I was born remembering a past life. There were times when I would scream at my family to stop dressing me up as a girl and to take me home. In my mind at the time, I was a 5-year-old boy from somewhere in Asia. I remember drowning in a river during a period of very heavy rainfall. One of my children has also spoken about his past life memories. When my second son was only 3 years old, he would scream in his sleep for his men to change their socks or they would get swamp toe. Which 3-year-old knows about getting swamp toe? He would also demand in his sleep that they place their guns over their heads when walking through the river neck deep. He would also wake up screaming, "Get down!" and as he got older he would tell me of his jungle war dreams he had always had. He would also wake up at around age 4 and bounce his legs up and down, screaming that they hurt. Doctors said he was too young for growing pains, as he wasn't in a growth spurt either. Around age 10, he dreamed he had his legs blown off in Vietnam and died. He was also in charge of several men. He said they were ambushed. One day, my 2-year-old granddaughter was lying down on a mattress on the floor. She was an early talker and she is particularly articulate for her age. All of a sudden she pointed to the ceiling and said, "I came from up there in the sky to be with my mammy. I picked her to be my special mammy because I love her. I would see her from up there and then I came down to be with her. So I went into her tummy and then I came out and here I am." I was shocked to say the least. This happened a few years ago and she has continued to make similar utterances. However, she has talked about it less and less as time goes by. I too remember past lives. When I was 4 or 5, I remembered by name a sister and my parents' names, my borough, the house, the olive trees, the stone barn, the little road to the village, and the fiestas at night during the hot weather. I can still see it in my mind, so I was Spanish several hundred years ago, but American now. That was my strongest memory. But when I first went to England, I had spontaneous past life memories from the area of Stonehenge to Bath. I also started to sob uncontrollably, with a calling in my heart that I was home. I also had memories of being in Britain when the Saxons invaded. I remembered my 2 younger brothers, who were the same 2 I have in this life. I remembered the name of my captor, and how I was fascinated with their superior type of crossbow. That was a cold and primitive life for sure. And that's the end of this video for this week. I want to thank you all for tuning in, much appreciated as always. I hope you enjoyed it, because I enjoyed finding the stories. So until next week, take care of yourselves and don't forget, stay spooky.